Montana Territory, 1873. The frontier land stretched out beneath a vast canvas of azure, untamed and indifferent to the troubles of those who dared to stake their claim upon it. Among the rolling hills and whispering pines of Silver Creek, a township barely holding on against the wilderness, Xander Galloway believed one thing with absolute certainty. A man rode faster, shot straighter, and lived longer when he kept his heart locked away. Love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford, and at 25 years of age, he'd seen enough to know that attachment only gave the harsh land another way to break you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered planks of Silver Creek's main street as Xander adjusted the brim of his tan Stetson, eyes alert beneath it. At 6 feet tall with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, he cut an imposing figure despite his youth. His face, handsome with a strong jawline softened only by the hint of stubble from days on the trail, rarely showed the smile lines that had once been common there. 2 years of running his late father's struggling cattle operation had hardened him, stripped away the boyish optimism that had once defined him. "You heading out today?" Sheriff Miller called from the boardwalk, interrupting Xander's thoughts. "Got to check the north pasture fence line," Xander replied, tugging at the leather gloves covering his calloused hands. "Might be gone a few days." The older man nodded. "Watch yourself," heard tell of some desperate types moving through these parts. Xander gave a curt nod, mounting his dun gelding with practiced ease. "Always do," the words carried his life philosophy. Self-reliance was the only reliable companion on the frontier. The ride north took him through terrain that grew progressively more rugged, the scattered homesteads giving way to untamed wilderness. Halfway to his destination, Xander spotted a thin column of smoke rising against the otherwise clear sky. Smoke meant people, and people out this far usually meant trouble. He should ride around it, avoid entanglements that weren't his concern. That's what a smart man would do. Instead, he found himself changing course, one hand resting near the Colt revolver at his hip. Caution had kept him alive this long. As he crested a small rise, the source of the smoke became clear, the smoldering remains of a small wagon, one wheel broken and splintered. A woman knelt beside it, frantically trying to salvage what she could from the wreckage. Even from a distance, he could see she was young, her movements frantic and desperate. The sound of his approach caused her to whirl, a small derringer appearing in her hand with surprising speed. Her eyes, bright blue and fierce despite the fear evident in them, locked onto him. Her dress, once a pretty blue calico, was smudged with soot and torn at the hem. Long blonde hair had mostly escaped its pins to frame a face that would have turned heads in any salon from St. Louis to San Francisco. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hand. Xander raised his palms slowly. "No harm intended, ma'am, just saw the smoke and thought to check." The woman hesitated, the small gun still trained on him. "Are you alone?" "Yes, ma'am," he answered, keeping his voice even. "Name's Xander Galloway. I run cattle about 20 miles south of here." Something in his manner must have reassured her, because she slowly lowered the derringer, though she didn't put it away. "Josephine Blackett," she replied, "though most call me Josie." Xander estimated she couldn't be more than 22, too young to be out here alone. "What happened to your wagon, Miss Blackett?" Her shoulders sagged slightly. "Wheel broke coming down that last hill. I managed to get most of my things out before the lantern tipped and set it ablaze." A flash of embarrassment crossed her features. "I should have been more careful." Xander dismounted, keeping his movements deliberate. "You headed somewhere in particular?" "Silver Creek," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "My uncle sent for me after my parents passed. Influenza took them both last winter." The mention of Silver Creek surprised him. "That's where I'm from, don't recall any Blacketts there." "My uncle is Henry Simmons, the banker," she explained. "My mother was his sister." Xander nodded. He knew Simmons, a stern, humorless man with a reputation for driving hard bargains, not someone Xander had much cause to deal with, given the state of his finances. "Well, Miss Blackett, looks like you've got a choice to make. I can escort you back to Silver Creek now, or I can continue on my way after helping you set up a proper camp. I'd be back through in 3 days, could take you then." Josie surveyed the scattered remains of her possessions, then the vast, empty landscape around them. A woman alone had few good options in such circumstances. "I'd be grateful for the escort back to town," she finally said, her pride clearly at war with practicality. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble," he replied, though it would delay his fence repairs. "Let's gather what we can carry." As they sorted through her belongings, Xander couldn't help but notice the contents. Books on business and accounting, practical clothing alongside a few finer dresses, a small wooden box she guarded carefully. Not the typical possessions of a woman coming west merely to keep house for an uncle. "You read all these?" he asked, hefting a volume on modern banking practices. Her chin lifted slightly. "I was my father's clerk in his mercantile for 4 years. I'm to help Uncle Henry with his books." The revelation surprised him. Most women he knew had little interest in such matters, but then again, the frontier had a way of reshaping traditional roles out of necessity. "Well, we can't take it all," he said finally, "not on one horse. Choose what you can't leave behind, and I'll come back for the rest once you're settled." Gratitude flashed across her face. You would do that for a stranger. Xander shrugged. Out here, helping when needed isn't kindness. It's survival. By mid-afternoon, they'd salvaged what they could. Xander helped Josie mount his horse, then led it by the reins, walking beside. The silence between them felt oddly comfortable, broken only by the occasional comment about the terrain or a question about Silver Creek. "Has it changed much in recent years?" Josie asked as the sun began its westward descent. "Some," Xander replied. "Got a real hotel now instead of just rooms above the saloon. Telegraph line came through last year. Still rough around the edges, though." "And your ranch, is it large?" A shadow crossed his features. "Was once. My father built it up from nothing. The Double G used to run 500 head before the winter of '71. "What happened?" "Blizzard hit early. Lost 2/3 of the herd and my father caught pneumonia trying to save what he could." The words came out clipped. "Been rebuilding since." Josie seemed to sense the pain beneath his matter-of-fact tone. "I'm sorry for your loss." Xander merely nodded, uncomfortable with the conversation's turn. "We'll make camp in that grove ahead, should reach town by tomorrow afternoon." The makeshift camp was simple but adequate. Xander built a small fire while Josie arranged her bedroll at a respectable distance. The flames illuminated her features, softening them from the determined set they'd held throughout the day. "Why did you stop?" she asked suddenly. "When you saw the smoke, most men out here mind their own business." The question caught him off guard. Force of habit, I suppose. "Most habits have reasons behind them." Xander poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "My father taught me that a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's watching. Out here, that sometimes means the difference between someone living or dying." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "The best I knew." Xander looked up, meeting her gaze across the flames. "What brings you west, really?" "Most young women don't choose the frontier if they have options." Josie's lips curved into a sad smile. "Who says I had options? With my parents gone and the mercantile sold to pay debts, my choices were limited." Uncle Henry's offer was generous, considering. "Considering what?" She hesitated. "Let's just say I developed a reputation for being difficult, too outspoken for proper society. Too interested in matters supposedly beyond a woman's understanding. Like banking. Like having opinions at all." There was a flash of defiance in her eyes. "My father encouraged it. Said a quick mind shouldn't be wasted, even if it belonged to a daughter instead of a son." Not everyone agreed. Xander found himself oddly impressed. Most women he encountered either embraced frontier hardship with grim determination or wilted beneath it. Josie seemed to face it with a calculating intelligence, assessing it like one of her ledger problems. "Well, Silver Creek's not exactly a hotbed of progressive thinking," he warned, "but folks tend to judge you more on what you can contribute than where you came from." "And what about you, Mr. Galloway? What do you judge people on?" The directness of her question made him uncomfortable. Whether they keep their word and pull their weight, the rest is their business. She studied him for a long moment. "A practical philosophy for a practical man. Out here, practical keeps you alive." "And is that enough, just staying alive?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. Was survival enough? Once he'd had greater ambitions, not just to maintain the Double G but to expand it, perhaps even start a family someday. But the harsh realities of frontier life had worn those dreams down to the basic imperative of endurance. "It has to be," he finally answered, more to himself than to her. The next day's journey proceeded without incident. the terrain gradually becoming more familiar as they approached Silver Creek. By mid-afternoon, the town's scattered buildings came into view, a tenuous outpost of civilization against the wilderness. "Your uncle's likely at the bank," Xander said as they rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. "Yes, I expect so." Was it his imagination, or did she sound reluctant? The Silver Creek Bank occupied one of the few brick buildings in town, a statement of permanence in a place where most structures seemed temporary. Xander helped Josie dismount, then gathered her salvaged belongings. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Galloway," she said formally, the camaraderie of the trail already fading now that they'd returned to civilization. "I'll fetch the rest of your things in a few days," he reminded her. "Once I've seen to my fences." Before she could respond, the bank door opened and Henry Simmons emerged, his perpetually serious expression deepening into a frown. "Josephine. We expected you 2 days ago." His gaze shifted to Xander, the frown intensifying. "Galloway." "Mr. Simmons," Xander nodded curtly. "Your niece had some trouble with her wagon about 30 miles north. Thought it best to bring her to town." The banker's demeanor softened marginally. "I see. Well, that was unexpectedly decent of you." "Just being neighborly," Xander turned to Josie. "Miss Blackett." "Thank you again, Mr. Galloway." Her smile seemed genuine, though tinged with something he couldn't quite identify. Resignation, perhaps. As he rode away, Xander found himself looking back once to see Josie standing stiffly beside her uncle, her posture suggesting a conversation that was anything but warm. Not his concern, he reminded himself. He'd done what was needed, nothing more. Yet as he made camp alone that night, the silence felt heavier than usual. 3 days of fence mending in the northern pasture left Xander sore and irritable. The work had gone slowly without help, and thoughts of Josie Blackett had distracted him more than he cared to admit. He'd found himself wondering how she was settling in, whether Simmons was treating her well, if she missed the books he'd promised to retrieve. "Foolishness," he muttered to his horse as they approached the site of the burned wagon. "Woman's fine where she is." The remains of the wagon stood as they'd left it, though animals had investigated the scattered belongings. Xander gathered what he could, the books, a wooden chest of clothing, a few personal items, and secured them to his packhorse. As promised, nothing more. Silver Creek seemed unnaturally busy when he returned, the saloon spilling raucous laughter and piano music into the early evening air. A mining outfit had struck a promising vein in the hills to the west, bringing an influx of men flush with optimism and ready cash. The bank was closed, its windows dark, but a light burned in the rooms above. Xander hesitated, then tied his horses to the hitching post and climbed the external staircase that led to the living quarters. His knock was answered by Josie herself, her expression shifting from wariness to surprise. "Mr. Galloway." "I didn't expect you so soon." "Said I'd bring your things," he gestured to the items he'd carried up. "The rest is with my horses." "Please come in." She stepped aside, revealing a modest but well-furnished room. A desk in the corner was already covered with ledgers and papers, suggesting she'd wasted no time in assuming her duties. "Your uncle not at home?" Xander asked, setting down her belongings. "Bank business." "There's talk of financing a new mine." She hesitated. "Would you care for some coffee? I was just about to make some." The proper thing would be to decline, deliver the remaining items, and leave. Instead, Xander found himself nodding. That would be welcome. While Josie busied herself at the small stove, Xander took in more details of the room, the neat organization, the absence of decorative touches, the utilitarian nature of everything. It felt temporary, as if she hadn't fully committed to making this place her home. "How are you finding Silver Creek?" he asked when she returned with 2 steaming cups. "Different than I expected." She sat across from him, her blue dress making her eyes seem even more vivid. "Uncle Henry is precise in his expectations." Something in her tone made him look more closely. "Mining?" "Meaning he expects me to earn my keep through more than bookkeeping. He seems determined to see me suitably married before winter." The revelation shouldn't have bothered him. It was the natural order of things. A young woman of marriageable age would naturally be guided toward an appropriate match, especially by her guardian. "Any prospects?" The question came out more gruffly than intended. A small, ironic smile touched her lips. "Several, according to my uncle, the new mine superintendent, the widower who owns the mercantile, even the mayor's son, though he's barely old enough to shave." "All fine men," Xander said, though the words tasted false. All men with money or prospects, she corrected, which is what matters to Uncle Henry. She set down her cup. I'm sorry, you didn't come here to listen to my complaints. No, I came to return your books. Speaking of which, he retrieved the volumes from the stack he'd brought up. These survived well enough. Her face brightened as she took them, fingers tracing the embossed covers. Thank you, these belong to my father. I couldn't bear to lose them. You really understand all that? He asked, nodding toward the complex diagrams visible as she flipped through one book. Most of it. Father believed education shouldn't be limited by gender. Pride colored her voice. I kept his books for years. Uncle Henry was impressed enough by my skills to offer me a position, though I'm beginning to think that was secondary to his matchmaking intentions. Xander found himself unexpectedly curious. And what do you want, Miss Blackett? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Want. If you could choose without worrying about your uncle's expectations or what's proper. What would you want for yourself? She was quiet for a long moment, absently turning her coffee cup. Independence, she finally said, the freedom to use my mind without apology. To build something that's mine, not borrowed or granted through a husband's generosity. The answer surprised him. Most women he knew dreamed of security, of homes and families. Josie's ambition was different, almost masculine in its directness. Difficult dreams for a woman, he observed, not unkindly. Yes, her gaze met his, unflinching, which is why I understand the value of compromise. Uncle Henry offers stability while I determine my next steps. And those would be. I'm not entirely certain yet, she smiled slightly, but this is the West, I'm told anything is possible here. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, the town's characters, the upcoming harvest dance, the prospects of the new mine. Xander found himself relaxing, enjoying her quick observations and subtle humor. When Henry Simmons's heavy tread on the stairs finally interrupted them, he realized with a start that nearly 2 hours had passed. The banker's expression upon finding Xander in his home was coldly disapproving. Galloway, what brings you here? Returning Miss Blackett's belongings as promised, Xander replied, standing. Just leaving now. Indeed, Simmons's gaze flickered between them. Josephine, the Marshalls have invited us to dinner tomorrow. Their son Thomas will be there, Harvard-educated, taking over his father's law practice. The message wasn't subtle. Xander moved toward the door, suddenly eager to escape the tension. Thank you again for retrieving my things, mister. Galloway, Josie said, her formal tone returning. Your kindness won't be forgotten. Outside, the night air cooled his inexplicable irritation. What did it matter if Simmons was parading his niece before every eligible bachelor in the county? It was the natural order of things. Josie Blackett would make some man a fine wife, intelligent, capable, easy on the eyes. That man simply wouldn't be Xander Galloway, a struggling rancher with more debts than prospects. Exactly as it should be, he told himself firmly. So why did the thought leave such a bitter taste? The Silver Creek Harvest Festival arrived with the first hints of autumn, transforming the dusty Main Street into a celebration of survival against the harsh frontier. Bunting hung from the hotel balcony, tables laden with food lined the street, and a makeshift dance floor had been constructed in front of the courthouse. Xander hadn't planned to attend. The Double G demanded constant attention, and social gatherings held little appeal for him these days, but his foreman Hank had practically ordered him to go. Been working yourself half to death, the older man had growled. Ranch won't collapse if you take one night for yourself. So here he stood, uncomfortably aware of his best shirt's frayed cuffs, watching townspeople celebrate the season's bounty. His gaze inadvertently found Josie across the crowd, elegant in a deep blue dress that emphasized her slender waist. Thomas Marshall hovered nearby, his expensive Eastern suit marking him as clearly as a brand. Quite the pair, aren't they? Sheriff Miller commented, following Xander's line of sight. Word is Simmons is pushing for an engagement announcement before Christmas. Sensible match, Xander replied neutrally, ignoring the inexplicable tightness in his chest. The sheriff shrugged. Maybe, though between you and me, I've seen warmer expressions on a rattlesnake than that girl shows when Marshall's talking. Coffee. As the evening progressed, Xander found himself watching Josie more than was proper. She moved through the social obligations with grace, but he recognized the tension in her shoulders, the careful mask she wore. It was the same one he'd seen when they'd first arrived in Silver Creek, polite, pleasant, and utterly unrevealing of her true thoughts. The musicians struck up a lively reel, and couples began to form on the dance floor. Xander turned to leave. He'd made an appearance, which was enough, when a soft voice stopped him. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Galloway?" Josie stood behind him, having somehow slipped away from her circle of admirers. Up close, her eyes held a spark of mischief that had been absent earlier. "Not much for dancing," he admitted. "Neither am I, truthfully, but it's expected." She glanced toward where her uncle was deep in conversation with the marshals. "Actually, I wanted to thank you properly for your help. I've been so busy at the bank I haven't had the chance." "No thanks necessary." "Nevertheless," she hesitated, "I wondered if you might show me your ranch someday. I've been cooped up in town since arriving, and I'd like to see more of the country." The request caught him off guard. "It's nothing special, just struggling along like most places." "I'd still like to see it, perhaps Sunday after church." "Uncle Henry always takes a long nap then. I could be gone and back before he wakes." The propriety of such an arrangement was questionable at best, but Xander found himself nodding. "If you're sure that's what you want." "It is." Something vulnerable flashed across her features. "I need to remember there's a world beyond ledgers and matchmaking dinners." Before he could respond, Thomas Marshall approached, his confident smile barely acknowledging Xander's presence. "Miss Blackett, they're playing a waltz. I believe you promised me this dance." "Did I?" Josie's mask slipped back into place. "How forgetful of me, Mr. Marshall. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Galloway." Xander watched them join the other dancers, Marshall's hand possessively at Josie's waist. The man leaned close to say something, and Josie laughed politely, though the sound didn't reach her eyes. None of his business, Xander reminded himself. He had a ranch to save, cattle to tend, and 100 worries more pressing than the matrimonial prospects of Josephine Blackett. Still, as he rode home beneath the star-filled sky, he found himself looking forward to Sunday with uncomfortable eagerness. Sunday arrived clear and cool, the mountains to the west already dusted with the first snow of the season. Xander waited at the agreed spot, a stand of cottonwoods at the edge of town, feeling foolishly nervous. He'd changed shirts twice, shaved carefully, and even attempted to tame his unruly brown hair, all for what was ostensibly a simple courtesy to a neighbor. Josie appeared precisely on time, riding a borrowed mare with surprising skill. Her riding habit was practical but becoming, her blonde hair braided and pinned beneath a small hat. She looked younger away from town, more like the determined woman he'd met by the burning wagon than the banker's polished niece. "You ride well," he observed as they set off toward the double G. "Father taught me." Mother never approved, said it was unladylike, but he insisted it was a practical skill. She smiled at the memory. He said the same about shooting, much to her horror. "And can you shoot?" "Well enough to discourage unwanted attention, though I hope I never need to." She guided her horse alongside his. "How far to your ranch?" "About 5 miles. Not much to see this time of year, with most of the cattle in the high pastures." "I'm more interested in seeing it through your eyes than judging its profitability, Mr. Galloway." Her directness still caught him off guard. "Xander," he said impulsively, "if we're going to break rules of propriety, might as well use my given name." She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Josie, then, and are we breaking rules of propriety?" "I thought we were simply taking a ride." "You know what people would say if they saw the banker's niece riding out alone with a bachelor." "Yes," she agreed, untroubled. "They'd say I was compromising my prospects with the eligible Mr. Marshall by associating with a man of lesser means." The blunt assessment stung, though she'd only stated the obvious. "Your uncle wouldn't approve." "Uncle Henry approves of very little that doesn't advance his interests. But sometimes a person must follow their own judgment, don't you think?" The question lingered between them as they crested a rise, revealing the double G spread out below, a modest house, weathered barn and outbuildings nestled against the backdrop of rolling grasslands. "It's lovely," Josie said softly. "I can see why you fight so hard for it. Been in the family since my grandfather's time, not much compared to some operations, but it's mine." They rode down to the ranch house, where Xander helped her dismount. The tour was brief, the house was simple, the barn utilitarian, the bunkhouse empty with the men out working. Yet Josie examined everything with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about the operation. "You're running this alone?" she asked as they sat on the porch with coffee, the autumn sun warm against the chill. Hank, my foreman, and 3 hands used to be twice that many. Xander stared out at the land, seeing not what it was but what it had been. My father had plans to expand further before the blizzard. And now I'm just trying to hold on. Bank loan comes due next spring. Cattle prices are down, been a bad year all around. Josie's expression grew thoughtful. Which bank holds your loan? First Territorial in Helena. Why? Just curious. Banking interests me. She sipped her coffee. Have you considered other revenue sources, diversification? The question surprised him, such as, the railroad's coming through 50 miles south next year. They'll need timber for ties, beef for workers, horses too. There might be opportunities there. Xander studied her with new appreciation. You've been investigating local business prospects. A slight flush colored her cheeks. I read the territorial papers Uncle Henry receives. Old habits from helping father with the mercantile. He always said opportunity comes to those paying attention. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, sadness flickered across her features. He wanted more for me than being someone's wife, said my mind was my greatest asset and I shouldn't waste it. Yet here you are, with your uncle parading suitors before you. For now, she met his gaze steadily. But I have plans of my own. Before he could ask what those plans might be, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Hank and 2 of the hands rode into the yard, surprise evident on their weathered faces at the sight of a young woman on the porch. Introductions were made, the men awkwardly removing their hats and fumbling greetings. Josie handled the situation with easy grace, showing interest in their work without condescension. Xander found himself watching her, impressed by how naturally she conversed with men most town women would consider beneath notice. We should start back, he said reluctantly when the hands had moved on to their chores. Need to have you home before your uncle wakes. The ride back was companionable, their conversation ranging from cattle breeds to books they'd read, from childhood memories to future hopes. Xander found himself speaking more openly than he had with anyone in years, sharing concerns about the ranch that he usually kept private. I think you're underestimating yourself, Josie said as they neared town. You see only what the ranch has lost, not what it could become. Practical to focus on what is, not what might be. Practical perhaps, but without vision, even the most practical man eventually loses his way. She smiled. Sometimes we need someone else's perspective to see possibilities we've overlooked. They parted at the edge of town, caution necessitating discretion. As Josie handed him the reins of her borrowed horse, their fingers brushed briefly. Thank you for today, she said softly. It meant more than you know. Xander watched her walk away, her straight back and confident stride at odds with the demure image she projected in town. He should leave matters there, a pleasant afternoon, nothing more. The differences in their situations were too great, the complications too numerous. Yet as he turned his horse toward home, Xander realized that for the first time in years he'd spent hours without the weight of grief and worry pressing down on him. Something about Josie's presence had temporarily lifted that burden, allowing him to see his life through fresh eyes. Dangerous thinking, he warned himself. She belongs to a different world when you can't provide. The rational thought did nothing to dispel the warmth that lingered from their day together. Over the following weeks, Xander found increasingly flimsy reasons to visit town, banking matters that Hank could have handled. Supplies they didn't strictly need yet. Each visit somehow included a chance encounter with Josie, brief conversations on the boardwalk, exchanged glances across the street, once even a shared cup of coffee when they both happened to visit the hotel restaurant. These moments, stolen and seemingly innocent, nevertheless drew notice. Xander caught the speculative looks, heard conversations halt when he entered the general store. Even Sheriff Miller made a point of casually mentioning that Simmons is mighty particular about his niece's reputation. He should stop, Xander knew. Cut the connection before it damaged Josie's standing, or worse, before his own foolish heart became too invested. Yet each time he resolved to keep his distance, he found himself riding into Silver Creek again, drawn by the possibility of seeing her smile. The situation came to a head on a bitter November morning. Xander had come to town ostensibly to discuss cattle prices with the butcher, but had lingered near the bank hoping for a glimpse of Josie. When she emerged, her face was pale and set, eyes bright with what might have been unshed tears. She spotted him immediately, her expression shifting to one of determination. Before he could react, she'd crossed to him, speaking in a low, urgent voice. "The creek path, 20 minutes, please." Then she was gone, continuing down the street without looking back. 20 minutes later, Xander waited by the small creek that ran behind the town, doubt warring with concern. When Josie appeared, wrapped in a heavy cloak against the cold, her agitation was immediately apparent. "What's wrong?" he asked as she approached. "Everything." She paced a few steps, then turned to face him. "Uncle Henry has all but promised me to Thomas Marshall. The announcement is to be made at Thanksgiving dinner." Though he'd known this was coming, the news hit Xander with unexpected force. "I see." "No, you don't," Josie's eyes flashed. "I've told Uncle Henry repeatedly that I have no interest in marrying Thomas, but he refuses to listen. Says I don't know what's good for me, that a woman needs security. And Marshall can provide that." "Marshall can provide a cage gilded with respectability." She stepped closer. "I don't love him, Xander, I never could." The implication in her words and the way she looked at him set his heart racing. "Josie, I know what you're going to say, that I should be practical, that love is a luxury the frontier can't afford." Her voice softened. "But I've seen how you look at me when you think no one notices. I know I'm not imagining this connection between us." "It's not that simple. Isn't it? Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll walk away right now. Tell me I'm just the banker's niece to you, nothing more." The challenge in her eyes demanded honesty he wasn't sure he could afford. "What I feel doesn't matter. I can't offer you what Marshall can. The double G is mortgaged to the hilt. One bad season away from foreclosure. Do you think I care about that? I've seen your ranch. I've seen how you pour your heart into it. That's worth more to me than Thomas Marshall's law practice or my uncle's approval." "You say that now." Xander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But what happens when reality sets in? When you're living in a drafty ranch house miles from town, wearing patched dresses and counting pennies? Then I'll use the education my father gave me to help turn things around." She reached for his hand, her touch sending warmth through him despite the cold day. "I'm not afraid of hard work or sacrifice, Xander. I'm only afraid of living a life that isn't true to who I am." He looked down at their joined hands. "Your uncle would never approve." "No," she agreed, "he wouldn't. Which means I have to choose his approval or my happiness." The weight of what she was suggesting settled between them. "I won't be the cause of you losing your family, Josie." "You wouldn't be." "That choice would be mine." Her gaze was steady, determined. "But before I make it, I need to know if there's something here worth fighting for, if you feel what I feel." Honesty warred with caution in Xander's heart. Since his father's death, he'd built walls around himself, convinced that attachment only brought pain. Josie had somehow slipped past those defenses, showing him possibilities he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. "I care for you," he finally admitted, the words inadequate for the emotions behind them. "More than I should, but caring isn't enough against the practical realities we face." Disappointment flashed across her features, quickly masked. "I see. Then I've misunderstood." "No, you haven't," he tightened his grip on her hand. "But I need time, Josie, time to think, to figure out if there's a way forward that doesn't end with both of us regretting our choices." Hope returned to her eyes. "How much time?" The announcement. "I know, before Thanksgiving. I promise you'll have my answer, one way or the other." She nodded slowly. "Very well. Until then, I'll hold Uncle Henry off as best I can." She hesitated, then rose on tiptoes to press a swift kiss to his cheek. "Don't take too long, Xander Galloway. Some opportunities don't wait forever." As he watched her hurry back toward town, Xander touched his cheek where the warmth of her lips lingered. What was he thinking, giving her hope when the obstacles between them seemed insurmountable? A practical man would walk away now, spare them both the inevitable pain. But for the first time since his father's death, practicality seemed an insufficient guide for the decisions that mattered most. The following days passed in a fog of indecision. Xander went through the motions of ranch work mechanically, his mind constantly returning to Josie and the choice before them. Hank noticed his distraction but said nothing, merely picking up the slack with quiet efficiency. On the fourth day, a letter arrived from First Territorial Bank in Helena, formally notifying him that due to changing economic conditions, his loan would not be eligible for renewal in the spring. Payment in full would be expected, a sum Xander knew was impossible to raise. The news should have settled matters. With foreclosure looming, what could he possibly offer Josie except shared destitution? The practical course was clear: step aside, let her make the sensible match with Marshall, secure her future even at the cost of her happiness. Instead, he found himself riding towards Silver Creek the next morning, a half-formed plan taking shape in his mind. If this was to be the end, he at least owed Josie the truth face to face. The bank was quiet when he entered, only one customer conducting business with the teller. Josie sat at a desk in the corner, head bent over ledgers, a strand of blonde hair escaping its pins to curve along her cheek. The sight of her made his heart twist painfully. She looked up at the sound of the door, her expression carefully neutral until the other customer departed. Then a smile broke through, transforming her features. "Xander. I didn't expect you today." "Needed to see you." He glanced toward the closed door of Simmons's office. "Is your uncle in?" "Helena on business, won't return until tomorrow." Her smile faded as she registered his serious expression. "What's happened?" Wordlessly, Xander handed her the bank letter. She read it quickly, professional assessment replacing personal concern. "This is aggressive," she said finally. Normally, they'd offer restructuring options, especially for an established operation like yours. Not much normal about it, just bad luck and worse timing. Josie's brow furrowed as she reread the letter. "May I see your loan documents, the complete file?" The request surprised him. Why? "Something doesn't feel right, the terms, the timing." She met his gaze directly. "Trust me, Xander, I might see something you've missed." An hour later, they sat surrounded by papers in the bank's back room, Josie's expression increasingly troubled as she examined ledger entries and correspondence. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, comparing documents. "The interest calculations are inconsistent, and these penalties weren't in the original agreement." Xander leaned forward, "Meaning what?" "Meaning someone's manipulating your loan to force foreclosure." She looked up, eyes bright with anger. "And I think I know who." "Simmons." She nodded grimly. "Uncle Henry sits on First Territorial's board. He's been corresponding with them about problem accounts in this region." She gestured to a stack of letters. "I've been processing these for him. Until now, I didn't connect them to you." The implications slowly dawned on Xander. He wants the double G. Or wants to ensure you're not in a position to. She trailed off, a flush rising to her cheeks. "To court his niece," Xander finished. The pieces fell into place: Simmons's coldness, the sudden loan recall, the push for Josie to accept Marshall. He's eliminating the competition. "It appears so." Josie's voice was tight with controlled fury. "And using unethical banking practices to do it. Can he get away with this?" "Not if we expose what he's doing." She began gathering documents. These discrepancies would interest the banking commissioner considerably. At minimum, they'd force a review of your loan on its original terms. Hope flickered briefly, then died. Even if that worked, it would make you Simmons's enemy. You'd lose everything: your position, your home, your family connection. "I'm beginning to think those aren't such great losses." The determined set of her jaw reminded him of their first meeting. "Uncle Henry brought me here for his convenience, not out of family devotion. If he's willing to destroy your livelihood to control my future, he's no family worth having." "Josie." "No, Xander." She laid a hand on his arm. "I came west believing I had no choices. That dependence on my uncle was my only option. But that's his lie, not my truth. I have skills, I have courage. And I refuse to let him use me as a pawn in whatever game he's playing." The fierce conviction in her voice stirred something deep within Xander, a recognition of the same fighting spirit that had kept him going after his father's death, that refused to surrender the double G without a battle. "What are you suggesting?" "We gather evidence, prepare our case, then confront Uncle Henry with it." Her eyes held his steadily. "Together." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond this immediate crisis. Together, a concept Xander had stopped believing in when he buried his father, convinced that relying only on himself was the surest defense against future loss. "This could get ugly," he warned. "Simmons has influence, connections." "So did the blizzard that nearly destroyed your ranch, but you survived that." A smile touched her lips. "Sometimes the practical choice is to fight, not surrender." His own words turned back on him with gentle irony. "Using my philosophy against me, Miss Blackett." "Applying it more broadly, Mr. Galloway." Her smile deepened. "Well, are we partners in this?" The question extended beyond their immediate problem to the future itself. Xander realized he'd already made his decision, had made it perhaps the moment he'd spotted smoke on the horizon and chosen to investigate rather than ride past. Partners, he agreed, covering her hand with his own. In this and whatever comes after. The relief in her eyes matched the lightning in his own heart. Whatever Simmons had planned, they would face it together, a concept that no longer filled Xander with dread but with unexpected hope. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline day that showcased the beauty of the Montana Territory in all its harsh splendor. Xander stood before the small mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the unfamiliar tie that completed his best suit, a garment rarely worn since his father's funeral. Today would change everything, one way or another. The evidence he and Josie had compiled over the past week was damning: altered loan documents, manipulated interest calculations, correspondence that revealed Simmons's intent to acquire distressed properties through questionable means. The banker had overreached, confident that his position protected him from scrutiny. "You ready for this?" Hank asked from the doorway, his weathered face concerned. The foreman was one of the few who knew what Xander planned. "As ready as I'll ever be." "It's a risk," the older man warned. "Simmons won't take this lying down." "Some things are worth the risk." Xander picked up the envelope containing copies of their evidence. "The ranch is one. Josie's another." Hank's expression softened. "She's a fine woman, got spirit." "More than I realized at first," Xander smiled slightly. "She reminds me that there's more to survival than just enduring. That sometimes you have to fight for the life you want, not just accept the one circumstances give you." "Your father would approve," Hank clapped him on the shoulder. "Go get him, boss." The ride to town passed quickly, Xander's mind focused on what lay ahead. The plan was simple but precarious: confront Simmons privately before the Thanksgiving dinner where Josie's engagement was to be announced. Give him the choice between facing exposure for his banking irregularities or withdrawing both his opposition to their relationship and the loan foreclosure. Simmons was a businessman at heart. Self-preservation would likely outweigh vindictiveness. Silver Creek was quiet, most businesses closed for the holiday. Xander tied his horse outside the bank, where a light in the upstairs window indicated someone was home. His knock on the private entrance door was answered by Josie herself, dressed in a russet gown that complemented her golden hair. "You came," she whispered, relief evident in her voice. "Said I would." He took her hands, noting their slight trembling despite her composed expression. "Having second thoughts?" "No," her chin lifted. "Just nervous, Uncle Henry is. Not a man who accepts defeat gracefully." "Then we won't give him the chance to be defeated, just the opportunity to make a wise business decision." She squeezed his hands. "He's in his study. The marshals arrive in an hour for dinner. Then let's get this done before they do." Henry Simmons looked up with irritation when they entered his study together, his gaze sharpening at their clasped hands. "What is the meaning of this, Josephine?" "Galloway, this is a private residence on a holiday. Whatever bank business you have can wait until Monday." "This isn't bank business, Uncle Henry." Josie's voice was steady. "At least not the kind conducted in public view." Simmons's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself." "We know what you've been doing," Xander said bluntly, placing the envelope on the desk. "Manipulating loan terms. Creating artificial defaults. Using your position at First Territorial to acquire properties at a fraction of their worth." The banker's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Absurd accusations. I suggest you leave before you say something legally actionable, Galloway." "The evidence is all there," Josie nodded toward the envelope. "Copies of original loan documents alongside the altered versions. Correspondence with Helena that outlines your strategy. Ledger entries that don't match official records." "You've been going through my private papers." Simmons's voice was dangerously quiet. "Betraying my trust." "After everything I've done for you." "After everything you've done to me, you mean?" Josie didn't flinch from his glare. "Bringing me here under false pretenses, using me as bait for your business schemes, trying to force me into a marriage I don't want while simultaneously destroying the man I do." The open declaration hung in the room. Xander felt a surge of protective pride at her courage, stepping closer to her side. "This is outrageous." Simmons rose, face flushing. "I've given you a home, a position, introduced you to respectable society, while secretly ensuring I had no real choices," she interrupted. That ends today, Uncle. We're not here to expose you publicly, yet we're here to negotiate. The banker's gaze shifted between them, calculation replacing outrage. What exactly do you want? The double G loan restored to its original terms, Xander said, with a fair refinancing option based on current market values. Your blessing, or at least your neutrality, regarding our relationship, Josie added. No more manipulation. No more pressure to marry Thomas Marshall. And if I refuse this blackmail, then copies of these documents go to the banking commissioner, the territorial governor, and every newspaper from here to Helena. Xander kept his voice level. Your reputation wouldn't survive it. Simmons sank slowly back into his chair, the fight visibly draining from him. You would do this, destroy your own family, Josephine. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to use me as a pawn. Her voice softened slightly. It didn't have to be this way, Uncle. I came here willing to help you, grateful for the opportunity. If you'd respected my choices, we wouldn't be here now. A long silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Simmons sighed. It seems I've underestimated you both. He gestured to the envelope. Very well, I'll have the loan paperwork corrected, and I'll inform the marshals there will be no announcement today. Relief washed through Xander, though he kept his expression neutral. A wise decision. But understand this, Simmons continued, his gaze hardening. If you proceed with this relationship, you do so without my support, financial or otherwise. Josephine, you will no longer be welcome in my home or my bank. The terms were harsh but expected. Josie nodded, her expression composed. I understand, I'll collect my things immediately. And where will you go? Simmons asked, a final barb. A respectable young woman, living without family or position. Before Josie could answer, Xander spoke. She'll stay with Mrs. Thornton at the boarding house until other arrangements can be made. Other arrangements? Simmons's laugh was bitter. How delicately put. Josie straightened, dignity in every line of her posture. I believe we're finished here, Uncle. I'll pack quickly and be gone before your guests arrive. Outside in the crisp November air, the tension finally broke. Josie sagged against Xander, emotion overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. It's done, he murmured, holding her close. You were magnificent. So were you, she looked up at him, a mixture of triumph and uncertainty in her eyes. But what happens now? I truly have nowhere to go. The question deserved a proper answer, not one rushed in the aftermath of confrontation. Xander took her hands in his, the gesture becoming familiar, treasured. For now, exactly as I said. Mrs. Thornton has a room ready for you. He'd arranged it the day before, anticipating this outcome. As for what comes next, that depends on you. On me. On what you want, Josie, he met her gaze directly. Because I know what I want. I want you at the Double G, helping me rebuild it into something we can both be proud of. I want your quick mind and your courage beside me, not just for the battles ahead, but for all the days that follow. Her eyes widened. Xander Galloway, are you proposing to me on your enemy's doorstep? Appears I am. He smiled, the weight of weeks of worry suddenly lifting. Not the most romantic setting, I'll grant you, but I've never been much for convention. Neither have I. Joy bloomed across her features. Yes. Yes to all of it. The kiss that followed was both a beginning and a culmination, of the connection that had sparked beside a burning wagon, of the understanding that had grown through shared confidences and common purpose, of the recognition that in each other they'd found not just an ally but a home. We should go, Josie said finally, reluctantly pulling away, before the marshals arrive. I'll help you pack, then see you settled at Mrs. Thornton's. Xander kept her hand in his as they walked. After that, I should get back to the ranch. Hank's expecting news. Good news, as it turns out. She smiled up at him, the first truly carefree smile he'd seen from her. Will you come for me on Sunday, after church? I'd like to see the Double G again, with new eyes this time. As your future home, you mean? As our future together. The word no longer frightened him. Instead, it felt like the most practical truth he'd ever known, that some burdens were lighter when shared, some joys deeper when witnessed by another heart that understood their value. Together they would face whatever came next. Spring came early to Montana that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green beneath. On the Double G, the changes were evident everywhere: new fencing in the south pasture, a freshly painted barn, calves frolicking in the meadows beside their mothers. Inside the ranch house, more transformations had taken place. Curtains hung at windows that had been bare for years. Bookshelves lined one wall of the main room, filled with volumes on everything from cattle breeding to banking regulations. The kitchen garden, neglected since Xander's mother had died years before, now flourished with early vegetables and herbs. Josie stood on the porch, surveying their domain with satisfaction. The past months had been challenging, establishing her independence, helping Xander restructure the ranch's finances, weathering the gossip that had inevitably followed their engagement. Yet they'd faced each obstacle together, growing stronger with each one overcome. The sound of horses made her turn, smiling as she spotted Xander riding in with Hank, both men dusty from a day checking fence lines. Her heart still quickened at the sight of him, tall and confident in the saddle, his face more relaxed these days, the burden of solitary responsibility lifted from his shoulders. "Successful day," she called as they dismounted. "Found 2 brakes and fixed 'em both," Hank reported, heading toward the bunkhouse. "Your husband knows his way around wire cutters now." "High praise from you," she teased the older man, who had become a surrogate father to them both. Xander climbed the porch steps, pulling her into an embrace despite his dust-covered clothes. "Missed you." "You were gone 6 hours," she laughed, not pulling away. "Too long." He kissed her softly, then more thoroughly when she responded. "Any word from Helena?" "The loan payment was received and recorded. We're official owners now, free and clear." Pride shone in his eyes. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Partner," she reminded him, using the word that had become their private promise to each other. Their wedding 3 months earlier had been simple but joyful, attended by the handful of people who mattered most to them. Simmons had not been among them, though he'd sent a terse note of congratulations and a modest wedding gift, his first acknowledgement of their marriage. The estrangement still pained Josie sometimes, but less with each passing day. She had found her place here, her skills as valuable to the ranch's recovery as Xander's knowledge of cattle and land. Together they were building something neither could have achieved alone. "I was thinking," Xander said as they entered the house, "about that idea you had for the East Meadow." "The apple orchard," she handed him a cup of coffee, familiar with his post-ride routine. "I think you're right, diversification makes sense. The railroad stop being built 10 miles south will need more than just beef." Josie nodded, pleased that he'd come around to the concept she'd been advocating. "It's a long-term investment, 5 years before we see real returns." "We have time," his gaze was warm on hers. "A lifetime to build this place into what we want it to be." The promise in those words filled her with contentment. From the uncertain young woman who had watched her wagon burn, to the banker's controlled niece, to now partner and wife, her mind and heart equally engaged in creating a future of her own choosing. Later that evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Xander's arm around her shoulders was both protection and partnership, his presence beside her the answer to questions she hadn't known how to ask before meeting him. "Any regrets," he asked quietly, "about the path not taken?" She knew what he meant: the comfortable town life she might have had, the security of a marriage to someone like Marshall, the continued connection to her only family. "None," she answered truthfully. "This is where I belong, who I was meant to be." His kiss was gentle, a reaffirmation of the bond between them. "When I rode out that day and saw smoke on the horizon, I nearly turned away. The practical thing would have been to mind my own business." "But you didn't." "Best impractical decision I ever made." His smile held wonder still, at the unexpected gift their meeting had become. "Who would have thought that helping a woman in need would lead me to exactly what I needed myself?" Josie leaned into him, grateful for the twist of fate that had broken her wagon wheel in Xander Galloway's territory. Sometimes the heart knows what the head hasn't figured out yet. Together they watched darkness settle over their land, the future stretching before them as vast and full of possibility as the Montana sky above.